We all know MMA is a terrifying sport. Fighters come out of their dressing rooms looking to beat down whoever's on the other side of that octagon. But that's not always the case. These are times UFC fighters backed out of a fight. Little does everyone know that inside their heads, they're going through the biggest mental battles of their lives. Some fighters admit to having full-on nervous breakdowns before fights. They're hoping an atomic bomb will strike the arena. They even go as far as hoping they'll get into a car accident on the way to the event, just so they wouldn't have to fight that night. Considering some of the beasts that step into the octagon, I don't blame them. Even the best fighters in the world experience pre-fight nerves. It's just nerves, part of the game. As you're about to see, there are many different ways fighters have backed out of a fight. From missing their weights by more than a few pounds, to basically giving up in the middle of a fight. The first fighter on our list is Khamzat Borts Chimaev. When Khamzat was slated to fight Nate Diablo Diaz, one of the most feared fighters in the UFC, he knew he was weaker in certain aspects of his game. Diaz and members of the media accused Khamzat of purposefully missing weight to dodge the fight. The day before the matchup was supposed to take place, Khamzat stepped onto the scale and weighed in at 178.5 pounds. Missing his weight by 7.5 pounds. That's quite a lot of weight. Some will say he simply had too many cheat days, but others wonder if missing weight by nearly 10 pounds was Khamzat's way of using a get-out-of-jail-free card. Some fighters will show up for their fights, but when things get a little too tough, they'll chicken out mid-fight. Case in point, Brock, the next big thing, Lesnar. If you're a real UFC fan, that's a name you know all too well. Lesnar's the very definition of a beast. His freakishly imposing stature is enough to leave anyone shaking in their boots. He didn't get his nickname for no reason. Once a former UFC heavyweight champion, Lesnar had just won a battle with diverticulitis when he was set to face off against Alistair the Demolition Man Overeem at UFC 141. Diverticulitis is the inflammation of one or more small pouches in the digestive tract, also known as a bad stomach ache. It was clear to everyone before the fight that Lesnar looked visibly shaken. Some even said he looked like a scared lamb. Overeem used his precision, power, and strength to deliver nasty blows to Lesnar's body. And 2 minutes, 30 seconds into the first round, Lesnar was hit with a brutal shot to the liver, and the referee called the fight. I can only imagine how much that would hurt, let alone when your intestines are literally inflamed and almost twice their size. Following the fight, Lesnar retired. Speaking of being a scared lamb, our next fighter was so scared, they didn't even put up a fight. You already know this is going to be a disappointment. The year was 2008, and Khabib the Running Man Starnes was fighting Nate Rock Quarry at UFC 83. Long story short, Quarry won the fight. Not because of his strength, speed, or power, but because Khabib Starnes didn't even put up a fight. Before the fight, Khabib knew he wasn't on the same level as Quarry. He decided to take the fight anyway because he had bills to pay. At the end of the fight, scorecards showed that Khabib only threw 53 strikes in the entire fight, while Quarry threw a staggering 164, landing 84 of them. In other words, Quarry landed more strikes than Khabib ever threw. Incredible. I can imagine being in that audience and watching this fight, being so unsatisfied with how the match played out. Even the most famous fighters in the world will back out sometimes. Fighters like the notorious Conor McGregor. You heard that right. It's not something you would expect from the Irishman, but it definitely happened. In a rematch fight with Nate Diaz at UFC 202, both men were putting on a great show for fans. But later in the fight, Conor started to back off. And somehow he won the fight by unanimous decision. Members of the media, including Diaz, had a lot to say about the judge's decision. Diaz claimed McGregor was evasive during the fight and was upset at the judges for not deducting points from McGregor's final overall score. According to Conor, he was only trying to stay away from Diaz's big volume punches. In Conor's defense, Diaz is a very dangerous fighter, especially when he's within striking distance. But running away from the fight surely didn't help Conor's macho man persona. I mean, how could Conor talk all that smack before and during the fight, only to start running away once the fight is almost over? Clearly, Conor was afraid of a last-minute KO. A scared lamb who couldn't even stand his ground. To be fair to Conor, though, he's far from the only one to get scared in the octagon. In fact, UFC veteran Brock Larson knows this all too well. Back in 2013, Larson found himself fighting Melvin No Mercy Manhoef. From the start, Melvin was in control of the stand-up game, a move that forced Larson to literally run laps around the cage in an effort to stay away from Melvin. Not surprisingly, judges deducted points from Larson's overall score. Larson knew he had to take Melvin to the ground if he wanted a chance at winning the fight. And in the later rounds, Larson made a comeback, securing a win against Melvin, even though he dropped out while doing it. But hey, whatever gets the job done, right? The Manhoef versus Larson fight reminds me of a similar fight that took place back in 2012 at UFC 143. I'm talking about Carlos the Natural-Born Killer Condit versus Nick Diaz. They were fighting for the interim welterweight title, and fans were expecting an all-out, sensational brawl. But what they got was something that could put anyone to sleep. A real snoozer. Why? Carlos Condit took an analytical approach to the fight. This left spectators wondering if Carlos was simply trying to stay out of Diaz's striking distance or that he might be afraid of Diaz. The judges awarded the win to Carlos, and understandably, Diaz and his fans weren't happy with the decision. One of Diaz's supporters, former UFC bantamweight queen Ronda Rousey, attended the fight and said, "If I wanted to see a man run for 25 minutes, I would go to a track meet." Diaz was so angry about the judge's decision, he thought about quitting MMA for good and claimed that Carlos had been running away from him the whole match. The last fight we'll look at also took place in 2012. It was a matchup between Clay the Carpenter Guida and Gray Bully Maynard. Everyone thought the highly anticipated lightweight matchup was going to be explosive, but what they got instead was mashed potatoes. A fight that some say was the biggest snoozer in UFC history. Guida basically wobbled and danced around the octagon with Maynard for the entire fight. Apparently, fans weren't the only ones who were annoyed. Referee Dan Miragliotta gave Guida a verbal warning for cowardice. Sorry, what I meant to say was timidity. Did you know that according to UFC rules, it's illegal to not engage with your opponent inside the octagon? Despite the rule, we still see fighters staying away, running away, not engaging, and straight up looking bad out there. There you have it, fight fans. Those were times UFC fighters backed out of a fight.